You're listening to episode 25 of The Secular Buddhist. Welcome to The Secular Buddhist. I'm Ted Meissner. The Secular Buddhist is the podcast and website for modern, secular application of early Buddhist thought. The podcast has interviews and roundtable discussions pertaining to engaged Buddhist training and practice, and the companion website has show notes for each episode, along with resource materials on Buddhism, critical thinking, science, secularism, and skeptical thought. Though the podcast focuses on core practice from a secular viewpoint, more traditional teachings are welcome and openly discussed. Today, Edith Haenel speaks with us about the Upper Midwest Summer Institute of Buddhist Studies and bringing her practice to others in her role as a social worker. Okay, show of hands. How many of us have ever said something like, "I'm so mad right now"? The fact is, most of us were probably raised with the idea that there is a me who is angry, and that at least double misperception makes it that much harder to escape from the suffering inherent in the habit of exercising ill will. How amazing it is to have the simple realization that this process we think of as our self is just that, a process. From that, one more easily accesses the fact that our emotional states are really mind states, interacting with the physical responses of our bodies to whatever's happening, or that we're creating at that moment. We're no longer swept into that maelstrom of passion without our consent, and we have the space to decide how that conventional us will interact with that ultimate arising and falling of continued process. Some of our fellow practitioners have taken this to their work as they help others who struggle against that tidal wave of feeling. Sometimes the simple act of asking someone to tell us what's happening in their body at those times can open a door to seeing a happier way of living their life. Edith Haenel is a clinical social worker in private practice in Albert Lea, Minnesota. Edith received her BA from Southern Methodist University and her master's degree from Iowa State University. Edith has meditated since 1995 and has studied at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies since 1997. Edith is on the planning team of the Upper Midwest Summer Institute of Buddhist Studies, which offers teachings by Buddhist scholars every year in Clear Lake, Iowa. She is also working with a team to bring the Alice Project education to this country. The Alice Project is an educational model that organizes education around the principles of Buddhism. So sit back, relax, and have a nice jamba juice. Not orange. Something with raspberry. And I am speaking with Edith. Edith, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, Ted, thanks so much for asking me. I feel so honored to be speaking with you.
Well, it's great pleasure to have you here. Now, we, as background to people who are listening to the podcast, you and I met at a Midwest, what was the title? Midwest Conference for Buddhist Studies.
Oh, it's kind of got a long title, but it's the Upper Midwest Summer Institute for Buddhist Studies.
Yes, and it was a wonderful week-long seminar that was, the main teachers were Andrew Olensky, who is the author of several books and the founder of the Berry Institute for Buddhist Studies, I think it is.
Both Berry Center for Buddhist Studies in Berry, Massachusetts.
Right, and I will, by the way, for folks who are listening to the podcast on iTunes, go to the webpage for this because I will have a link to these things we're discussing. And Mark Nunberg from Common Ground Meditation Center in Minneapolis, who is also helping guide us in this really wonderful seminar on Buddhist ethics. And we got to talking afterwards, and I thought it would be really nice to have you on the podcast as yet another person who exemplifies putting this practice into their daily life. So, Edith, if you could tell us a little bit about what your background is and kind of what led you to having this practice.
Well, I suspected, Ted, that you would ask me that, and I began to think about it, and I can remember when I was a young teen, sitting on the couch in my living room and just thinking and just enjoying that just very quiet, silent time. And it drove my mother to distraction. My mother was, a Depression-era child, adult, and she always wanted me to be productive, and she didn't see this as being productive. But, as I look at my practice and I look back on that, contemplative reflection has always been something that spoke to me, gave me a rest, gave me a place to go. Now, there was a huge gap between that and then, what I would call my practice. I was lucky enough to study with a man 15 years ago, 20 years ago. I'm a therapist, a clinical social worker, a wonderful man who was a fabulous therapist. It was not Buddhist, but a lot of the way he worked was in the Buddhist tradition, and so I started studying with him and began to meditate. He died, and I was quite bereft and just in need of some guidance and some... Anyway, I found the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies online and just thought, I'm going to go. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about anyone there. They were offering a class then and still do on the Essentials of Buddhist Psychology, which Andy Olinsky does. That's really quite good. And I went there and I said, I am home.
Yes.
Prior to that, I dabbled a little bit in Buddhism. I knew a little bit about Buddhism, and I had read a lot of, read some books, and I was excited about it. And then I heard the Dalai Lama speak, and he said, if you come from a predominantly Christian background, stay there. Don't become Buddhism. And so I took him at his word, and I spent about 2 years looking at Christianity and reading about it, and very much lots of really good stuff there. But then I'd sneak over and read another book about Buddhism, and I would again have that sense of, I'm home. And so at some point I just crossed the line and said, I'm Buddhist. My way of thinking is this, my way, and it has really shaped and given my life so much. So that's, and so I keep struggling as a practitioner along the path, using Buddhism to guide me and, structure my life and inform my life, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been really good for me, really good to me.
What have you found to be some of the biggest challenges that you've run into in your practice?
Oh, probably the same as everybody else, regular meditation.
Yeah. Yeah, none of us understand that at all.
I can remember reading a book by Stephen Levine, I'm not sure how you pronounce that, and, he talked about, in all the books I'd read by him, daily practice, and then there was a book and it shifted to regular practice, and he put in there that he had gone to hear one of his personal gurus speak who had talked about regular practice, and he went up afterwards and he said, what do you mean by regular practice? And he said, well, I'm on the road, I do a lot of speaking, I don't always get to meditating every day, and so I took myself out from under the pressure, and I practice as regularly as I can. And so probably regular practice, daily practice is my biggest challenge.
And I think that would be the case for many of us, in particularly leading the householder life, as the tradition says, is that we're not in a place where our dedicated job, as monastics have it, it's their job to do this moment by moment, and there are specific chunks of the day of several hours worth that are set aside for it. One of the things that many of us share that challenge is, gosh, I'm so busy, when do I sit? What kinds of things can you do based on your experience with this that may help people to set up their own regular sitting practice?
Well, one of the things I did early on was I set up, I have an office, and, I'm a clinical social worker, and I just wrote a letter to everyone who I thought might be teeny bit interested, and I said, please come to my office on Tuesdays and meditate. And I knew if they were coming to my office, I'd be more likely to sit down and join them.
Yeah.
I had to go. And so we've been meditating our little dinky sangha. Sometimes there's 2 of us, sometimes there's 5 of us, just kind of depending on the ebb and flow. Have been meditating like that for about 15 years.
Wow.
And so setting up some, of course the goal is to have this internal reference of sitting, and to have an external reference of sitting, and so that you join a sangha, create a sangha, to start practicing, and if your regular practice is once a week, great, because what I have learned, throughout the practice is the practice draws you along, and so the more you practice, the more you practice. And so if you set up some external kinds of structures, sometimes you can, over time, begin to internalize them. And I find myself now, even if I don't sit down on a daily basis and meditate for 30 minutes, I will, while I'm sitting waiting for this, that, or the other, I will close my eyes and focus in. And, so it's that anything I can do to maintain awareness of the need, desire to meditate.
It sounds like that as one's experience with the meditative practice in particular continues, that your time off the cushion starts to manifest some of those same mindfulness skills that you've been working on. Are you finding that's the case?
Oh, absolutely. Someone who really isn't of the Buddhist tradition, but really helps with that, is Charles Tart. And I don't know if you've read any of his books, but
tell us more. Tell us more. Things I can link to.
Charles Tart, God, you know what? It's been a while since I've read his book, so I can't think of any of his book titles at the moment. But T-A-R-T, Charles Tart, and he comes out of the Gurdjieff tradition, where it was much more mindfulness as you went about your daily life. You would go to you'd go to workshops that Gurdjieff had done, and you would be working on, hammering mindfully. So he has a lot of great things to do to help that really helped early on, and I still use sometimes. It's like, I have to go to the bathroom in my office, you have to go down these stairs, and so I always stop a minute and always start with the right foot. Mm-hmm. And then go down going right, left. It just stops my busy thinking mind in the day of the office. It's just a stop practice. Other things he suggests, like for a period of time, don't go through any doorway with your left foot. Only go with your right foot. And then after a while, switch to your left foot. Just anything to stop your thinking mind from just, automatically taking you through the day. Just things to stop and bring it to a moment of mindfulness. It's a lot like Thich Nhat Hanh's don't answer the telephone on the first ring, but, first ring I breathe in, second ring I smile, third ring I pick up, So some of those are external things. Yes, the more you can create mindfulness, the more you can create mindfulness.
Yeah, I see one of his books, I did some checking while you were speaking, and Living the Mindful Life is one of the books on target with that, and another one, Mind Science, Meditation Training for Practical People. Right. Another one he has here. Now, another one that of course, makes me twitchy a bit is a book I'm seeing here, Learning to Use Extrasensory Perception.
Oh, no, I don't know a thing.
Yeah, I got a harder time with that one.
Yes, I would too. I think what the Buddha was saying is there's enough arising phenomenologically within that we don't need to go to that extrasensory stuff. Someone was just asking me about that in our talking about that, who's also in our class, talking about Andy staying very, very tightly to phenomenological experience and not looking at anything,
dogmatic expressions of belief.
Yes, and it was just about staying with what is, and I said, well, that's what the Buddha presented, that enlightenment or whatever any awakening, the small ones, the big ones that you come to through phenomenological experience, and it can be informed by, you can certainly support that by reading or cognitive kinds of things, but the insight, the stuff comes through phenomenological stuff. And there's enough there to work on. I heard Thich Nhat Hanh saying, I've been looking at my breath for 30 years and I'm not bored yet, looking at each breath. And so there's enough there without having to go outside and look elsewhere.
Right, exactly. And I think that the way you were just describing it and the way Andy had described it is phenomenologically that there is all of this, and this is very much in keeping with early Buddhist teaching, that things are just process. There is no self. There is no continuity. And the idea of permanence or impermanence, self and continuity it's not nihilism in the final nibbana, because really there's no self to start with. There's nothing to destruct. It's just phenomenon, ongoing.
Exactly.
That's
and boy, is that a tough one to grasp. You said, what are the hardest parts? Well, grasping some of that, boy, it's really easy for me to sit and grasp and look at that. But, when I'm agitated or angry about something, and self arises all over the place, it's hard to let this phenomenon roll on, and just be accepting of that. But you're absolutely right. There is no self. There is no guiding sense enduring me. Talking about what we're talking about here in terms of how I use this in my work as a therapist, phenomenological experience is really what I use in my work with clients in order to help them ground themselves in their own experience.
Tell us more about what that looks like when you're in with a client and you're talking about things. How are you applying that?
Well, a real clear way to look at it is I work with a lot of children who are unattached. There's a diagnosis reactive attachment disorder, and these are the kids that were, in its most severe way it expresses itself, are the kids that do drive-by shootings and do those kinds of things, and they don't have any remorse. Now, most of the kids that I work with don't have that severe behavioral manifestation, but they also are completely disconnected from themselves. Attachment disorder means that when they were infants, that they had parents who weren't able to bond with them, and so the infant wasn't able to establish the essential internal mechanism that allows them to attach to people. And so then as they get older, it just causes all kinds of difficulties for them and their caregivers, of course. Not only are they not attached to others, but they're also not attached to themselves. In the first year of life, these kids, parents were either into drugs or were ill, or some reason the parent could not be attentive. And so that's very, very painful for adolescents, and their kind of internal system says, we're never going to be in that much pain again, so we'll just disconnect here. And so they don't have a sense of their own phenomenological experience in terms of pain. Now, it still rolls along, and so that's why they act it out, and they have no connection with that, and so they can steal, they can lie, they can do a lot of things, and no emotional connection to it. So then when they come to my office, part of my job is to help them understand that they can get connected to themselves. And the only place, a lot of people say, well, I feel angry, adults, children, whatever, in my office, and I say, oh, I'm sorry, you can't feel that. And then I go on to explain, you can feel pressure, you can feel tingling, you can feel tightness, you can feel fluttering. You can't feel anger, sadness, nervousness. Those are constructs. I feel tightness in my chest, my fist clench, and I say, oh, I feel these things. My story is that I'm going to be angry here. I'm angry. And then eventually it becomes an automatic thing that I'm angry. So what I do with adults and children is I say, well, tell me, how do you know you're angry? And a lot of times they say, well, I just feel angry. I'm like, well, you can't. Well, I say, where do you feel that in your body? And many people will say, well, I don't feel anything in my body. And I had this teacher say to me, oh, you can't feel nothing in your body. That's what corpses are, So then you say to them, what do you feel? I feel pressure. I feel tingling. I feel tightness. We can drop the words, we can drop the anger. Those are loaded words. I'm angry. I'm sad. I'm frustrated. Those are loaded words. And now we're in a space of just sensate feelings. And what happens for people as they experience those without building a story around them, they can be there with more acceptance and more compassion, and then that energy becomes something else, and they can feel quite expanded, calm. I mean, that's the end goal, and it may take over a period of time, but they begin not to project their story into the world, but to have much more of an in-chargedness about themselves and about their phenomenological experience. And it's very amazing to watch, particularly children, like attachment disordered children, come to that sense of calmness. First of all, feeling it and just kind of like, wow, and then having it be, and then generally where it eventually takes them is wanting to be closer, wanting to be held by parents in a way that they've never been held before.
Mm-hmm. So it sounds like what is happening in that practice is right now when people come in, as do many of us in our daily lives, have this ironclad association with the emotion and ourselves, that I am angry, it's my anger, it's this thing that it's got its own self, as do I, and I own it, it's part of me, and there's not really much choice in my being this way.
Right.
And that this practice takes in the early Buddhist concept of, well, as we look at it closely, not so much. The idea of emotion in the early Buddhist, in the Pali Canon, wasn't really so much a thing we had so much as the physical reactions that you're describing. There's a tightness, a heaviness, your heart rate is increasing, things like that, and a mind state that's accompanying it. And these are phenomena that when we're aware of them, and I think what you're doing is helping people realize, oh wait, that's not me, that this is something I have a choice about, that I can sense these physical things, and I can have a mind state of agitation or calm, and separating that out helps people not go into the being swept away by what we perceive as ironclad emotions in ourselves.
Absolutely. It gives us enough space to begin to be able to change our relationship to what arises. Sometimes I never choose to have anger or any of those heavy states arise. They just arise. I'm human. And so they arise, and if I can let them arise as a sensate experience instead of a construct, that gives me a little wiggle room. Oh, look, anger's arising. What do I want to do here? I can relate to it much more differently. Another one that's very common, it's very easy for most of us to identify with, is a lot of people will come into my office and they'll say, well, I just feel so empty. I had a man in my office, and emptiness, and I'm not talking about emptiness in a Mahayana way or a Buddhist way. I'm just talking about that sort of despondent sense of I'm unfulfilled. Many of us feel emptiness, and in this our culture gets a very bad rap. Emptiness is not a good place to be or thing to experience. And I always say to people, well, look around. The room you and I are sitting in is actually mostly empty. And if it weren't empty, we couldn't be here. And so I do the same thing, and I say, well, where do you experience the emptiness in your body? And then they point, and I say, now what I want you to do is image that you're very, very small, and you can go in through your ear, your nose, or whatever, and you go into that empty space, and you walk around. And so people get in there, and typically people go, I say, well, tell me what it's dark in here. And I say, really? And they say, yes. And I'll say, well, tell me about the darkness. Well, they said, what do you mean? And I said, well, is it pitch dark? Is it velvet dark? Is it midnight dark? Okay, we established that. What does the air feel like? Oh, is that pleasant or unpleasant? And what happens in 95% of the things when we do this exercise, people love the quiet, they love the texture of the dark, they love what the air feels, and they sit down in there and just be, and they have an expanded experience. And so it's just a very, very quick way of helping people come to see that letting go of the self, the story, however you want to do it, and being involved in just what's arising is where the freedom lies. And so it's just slowing, it's a lot about just slowing people down and helping them become mindful, in the more full word. So much mindfulness that word is bandied around a bit. and from a Buddhist tradition is somewhat being a little bit misused. I know in my profession there's a billion workshops, mindfulness and this and they're really just talking about paying attention as opposed to mindfulness in that fullest. And so, mindfulness only comes through experience and doing some of those. But those are some of the ways that that I just use mindfulness on a daily basis, helping people slow down their experience and pay attention to their lives.
Yeah, and that's one of the things that you'd mentioned a few times as we've been talking about that expanded place, that you help them slow down, put on the brakes and really get the elbow room, because when they come in to see you, when it's reached a point where really the coping mechanisms just aren't working, they need help with this, is a sense of constriction and not being able to move, and even with the sense you said people coming in feeling empty, and that just sense of ennui and not very happy, that again is a place of constriction and not seeing alternatives. So are you running into a trend that once people get a little bit of an idea of what we're doing in separating out the story from the person, and that they are not inextricably linked, and there can be some expansion in the moment to help them deal with this, are they taking that then outside and using that practice a little bit more in their own lives? Is it helping them beyond just the momentary issue that they're running into?
Well, and that's sort of my goal is, so we use whatever issue it is that they bring into the office that they're dealing with. And then I always try to put in a little, now you can use this and I always say, don't let this experience stay an event. Let it become a process. So,
well said.
You can have a nice event in therapy. You can have a nice, many of us have great spiritual experiences, and we think, this is it, I've arrived, and of course we lose it then.
Yeah.
Because of all of the cause and conditions arising, and it takes a great deal of practice for us to reshape our own causes, or the causes and conditions that arise, and as we reshape our response to them, and so it is a process. It's sort of how I make my money if it was a process. If it was an event instead of a process. But I think it's also sort of the same thing within the tradition, how you have a teacher and that you have to sit on that cushion every single day, or not every single day, but on a regular basis. So it's a process over time, and I think it was Mark Nunberg at our last week who had made a really nice comment that all change is, or maybe it was you, Ted, I can't even remember, all change is organic change, and all change is gradual change. And
I didn't say anything that smart, so it must have been.
Well, somebody did, and I latched onto it, and I just said it, for the last 2 weeks to many clients, and gave a little speech the other day, and I was, talking to parents and saying, you have to really expect this to be quite slow and incremental. So, but I do think people do find learning to ground themselves in these experiences a profound experience, because we're not locked in anymore.
Right. And we often use the metaphor of climbing a mountain. And I use this at work a great deal too, outside of the practice, that we may have ups and downs and rocky roads on this trail that we're on. We're headed in the right direction, though. So there's a direction and there's the path itself. And what we need to do is it is one step at a time. That is how you get to the top of the mountain. And you need every now and then to kind of stop, take a break, and look behind you at how far you've come, despite it being really, really hard at the time. Mm-hmm. You got through it. And up ahead are going to be things that are really, really hard, but you'll get through those too, and you'll enjoy this beautiful view that's higher up as you go.
Right, exactly. I mean, that's exactly it. It's just, the more you move, perhaps until you get to Nibbana, which, many of us are probably not going to make this lifetime, but until you get to there, every step is difficult because every step is new territory. And so it's maybe not every step is difficult, but every new level, I've never been there before, and so that's difficult until I, gain some mastery over that.
And have actually been there, yeah.
Yeah.
Now, Edith, you were instrumental in helping set up the seminar that we attended a few weeks ago, and what were some of the things that you found most rewarding about making the arrangements for this and getting it together and actually being there and having it?
People always say we've done it for 2 years and we intend to make it an annual event. I'll tell you the real truth, Ted. The hardest part was getting up the courage to ask Andy to come and do this, because I have great reverence for Andy. He's a jewel of a teacher, and so I had known him for a number of years, and I had immediately wanted to bring the kind of teaching that Andy exemplifies to the Midwest. And I'd also wanted, there were a lot of people that are doing great work in terms of providing meditation retreats, but there's not a lot of just scholarly focused entities out there. And so I wanted to bring that to the Midwest. Once Andy said that he would do it, you'll recall that my colleagues, Stacy Lancaster, Frankie Weingartner, Jackie Peterson, and then our great cook and her family, Liz Reckamer, pretty much just coalesced. They were friends of mine, and I said, I've invited this guy. Are you guys interested? And they said yes. And then beyond that, it was effortless. It was a joy. I mean, things just fell in place, and there really wasn't a great deal of work attached to it other than putting the word out. And I knew that people know and respect Andy's teaching, know and respect Mark's teachings, and it would basically just be to get the word out, and people would come, and that's exactly what happened. We have had just wonderful groups both years, and intend to continue doing it. It's terribly satisfying. Last year was the first year. I was expanded the whole week. I was just bursting. It was so fun and so emotional, because there were a lot of people there that were very important to me, that I cared about and loved, and I knew would not probably have made it to Barrie for one reason or another. So it was just so exciting offering the teachings, or being a conduit so that Andy and Mark could offer the teachings. And of course it just expands my own practice and my own, knowledge about Buddhist studies. And so, oh God, it's win-win all the way around. And I get to meet fabulous people, like you. I mean, there's a wealth of practitioners and a wealth of information and a wealth of just loving kindness and compassion in that room.
Yeah. This is one of the things that I would mention to the listeners. We've had in a couple of the podcasts that have come out recently a mention of this kind of thing where there's a need to build community, that many of us are in places where we don't have the particular kind of scholarship that Edith mentioned here, that Andy Alensky brought with us. That's a very modern approach, and he has the deep scholarship and the understanding of the really polytexts that for me was very refreshing, because my experience has been wonderful with monastics in the Theravadan tradition. That's been terrific. This is another expansion of learning for me in this. Certainly, it was a wonderful week, and what we've been talking about, and several people have brought up, Edith, is that when you start taking that step yourself in building a community, and whether it's meetup.com and you want to start your own secular Buddhist meetup group in your area because there isn't anything like it, that does gain its own energy, and people do start coming out of the woodwork, because really they're waiting for the dam to break and for someone to start it. And then there is this proliferation in a positive way, positive proliferation of people and ideas and shared experiences and Sangha building. So I would encourage people who are listening that if you're kind of stuck in an area, or you're feeling that you're adrift and on your own, and you've just discovered this particular kind of practice, then please take a look. Go online. See if there are other groups already there. If there aren't, start one. You might be surprised. People should be showing up. And as Edith has been saying here, it's a wonderful opportunity because people just come to this, and you do develop your community. And in our modern age, we're doing that more and more online. It's great to have the interactions with people, though. So that's considering events and having those where you get some face-to-face time is just a terrific thing. Edith, for next year, I know we're again going to be doing another Midwest group because this one that I attended a few weeks ago was wonderful, and everything from what I heard from the people who were attending the second time around, who were there at the first one, we're just going to keep expanding. People are going to keep doing it because Andy's a wonderful teacher, Mark is a wonderful teacher, and the participants are terrific. Do you have any ideas about what particular kind of topic you'd like to do for next year's?
Well, we, if you'll recall, right at the last day, there was a great deal of energy about just looking at the concept of non-self or not self, or and then there's so we're batting ideas around. So that's one idea. Someone also mentioned the idea of looking at healing. We generally leave the topic up to Andy. If people are interested, they can go online to the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies website and get an idea. Andy is not the only teacher. Andy teaches a few of the classes, and then they bring, teachers from all over the world, essentially, to teach there. They're at a college level, those classes, so you get an idea of what are some of the kinds of teachings that are offered there, and it's, all the way placed from 1 day to 8-day classes. And so Andy, I think, is considering teaching a class about healing and then incorporating how is non-self, how is impermanence, how is dukkha, and all of those related to healing. And so I know there's lots of ways to look at healing, and so it would be a topic of great interest to a lot of people. But we generally just, what we've done in the last couple of years is set a date and a time, and we put out a save the date flyer, and then Andy percolates on what he wants to teach, then lets us know of the topic down the line, and then we put out the final flyers. I'll plug Andy's book here because it's brilliant. Andy just came out with a new book called Unlimiting Mind.
I've actually had that posted on the homepage of the Secular Buddhist website for several weeks, and I'll be attaching it again on the episode link for this episode, and also it'll be under Resources Buddhism all the time, so you can find it there.
I can't encourage people to buy it enough. If you've read a billion books on Buddhism, buy this one again, because Andy has a way of cracking the code and making it so accessible and yet so crystal clear and profound. I would really encourage that. I wanted to go back, though, and just talk a minute about what you said, if you have an idea. I had the great fortune to go to India in February. The Berry Center for Buddhist Studies sponsored a pilgrimage. We went to all of the sites of the historical Buddha. Andy's colleague Musong, who's also the program director at the Berry Center for Buddhist Studies, was a scholar that went along with us. We had the opportunity to go to a school called the Alice Project, and this is a project. It's run by a man, or founded by a man by the name of Valentino Giacomin and his partner, whose name escapes me at the moment. They started, an Italian man and an Italian woman, they started teaching school based on the concepts of Buddhism, and they then have started a school in Sarnath, India, which is close to Deer Park, where the Buddha had, taught his very first teachings, and it's called the Alice Project. And then there's also a school for 350 kids in Bodh Gaya, where the Buddha was enlightened. There's also, I noticed, a school in Colombia, the country of Colombia, and the country, was it Hawaii, Taiwan? I can't remember. And we're hoping there's going to be a school in the Midwest. So this school is fabulous. Valentino runs it completely on the concepts of Buddhism. It's not a Buddhist school per se. The reason it's called the Alice Project is because of the story of Alice in Wonderland. If you'll recall, Alice's the whole story was in her head, and so Valentino teaches the children that their world construct is all in their head, and so that they can really change their world view and world construct by learning to meditate and concentrate and take on the precepts, live the Brahmaviharas, etc. These are in the main school in Sarnath, for example, there are 660 kids off the streets of India, and so there are problems of nutrition, of domestic violence, all kinds of social services, medical difficulties, et cetera. And it's a K through 12 school, and generally most every kid who graduates goes on to college. It's a phenomenal school. So myself and some others are going to India in January and February, and we're going to train in the Alice Project model, and then come back and either start an after-school program or a school, and see if we can't then build enough momentum and enthusiasm and excitement to teach people to do this model across whoever wants to do it, because this is one of the most incredible places. I mean, we only got to be there about an hour and a half or 2 hours, and the people that have come back from our trip have earned a lot of money to send back to the Alice Project. It was just phenomenal. They have a very nice website. And so I'm also plugging, we're very much in the early stages. If there's anybody who's listening to this who has an interest, we are definitely still in the very early planning stages. There's a man who's interested. I met at the class 2 weeks ago who has started charter schools, who's very interested. There's a writer who's interested in writing a book. I mean, people are coming out of the woodwork because this is a very exciting idea.
For people who are listening to this, the website is www.aliceproject.org. And you can find on that website, there are links about things like books and stories, sponsor a child, and they also have their own blog. So please be sure, go and check it out. Edith, is there anything else you'd like to bring up before we wrap to a close?
Well, Ted, I could talk forever about Buddhism and how it's changed my life. Nothing comes to mind at the moment, but, then we want to talk about, when I was in the third grade, but Buddhism has, changed the work I do, but it's also completely changed my life, through some very, very difficult times in my life. Buddhism has been there to help me through.
I think that's the case for many of us, that we've run into challenges in our lives, or whatever tradition we're from maybe doesn't quite resonate with us as much as this does. And it's not to say that there's anything wrong with different traditions. We all go to the place where we find the best fit. And in this one, as you have, as I have, as many people have, found it to be very positively transformative in how we approach our daily lives. And that's more than just meditation. That's one of the things that keeps coming up, is that it's not just meditation. There's a whole framework here that is more supportive than simply that. There's more to it.
Well, just leave with something Andy said, just dovetailing with that. And he got his PhD in comparative religions, and he said there was great stuff in all of them. But the reason he really began to look at the path of Buddhism is because it was really the only path that really focused in on the nature of the human experience and how humans could change the nature of their own experience by following the teachings of the Buddha. The Buddha over and over and over said, "I'm just a man, anyone can do this." And that it was really based on our own individual experience and our own relationship to our own individual experience. And that's what makes it so transformative for many people.
Yeah, I agree completely. That's been my experience and the experience of many people who've been practicing and continue to practice each day. Edith, thank you so much for being here. It's been a wonderful conversation.
Oh, thank you so much. I feel so honored. Thank you very much. So nice to talk to you.
Thanks for listening. If you'd like to learn more about something you've heard in today's podcast, please come visit the companion website at www.thesecularbuddhist.com, and you'll find an entire web page devoted to this and every episode. There are also links to discussions about today's topic on the Secular Buddhist Facebook fan page. The music for the Secular Buddhist is used by permission from John Kaizan Neptune's CD, Steps in Time. Additional music is provided courtesy of Monty Levinson of Taihei Shakuhachi and Rodrigo Rodriguez. Their websites are linked on the Secular Buddhist on the About Music page. Until next time, remember, every moment you have a choice. Make it the best you can. See you next time on The Secular Buddhist.